If they really loved you, they wouldn't have to say it, right? Wrong. Welcome to Emotional Manipulation, Buddhism edition, where the quietest words control you and guilt often dresses in pearls and smiles. Hi, I'm glad you're here, whether you were guilt-tripped into clicking or showed up with curiosity. Welcome to Buddhist Wisdom for the Elderly, where we turn spiritual confusion into clarity and the emotional horror show into tea and reflection. Today's controversy? That being nice is a virtue. Spoiler, it's not. Sometimes it's just fear in a polite hat. Now don't panic. We're not here to burn bridges, unless they were holding you hostage. We'll explore how manipulation sneaks into our lives through praise, pity, silence, guilt, and that sweet little voice in your head that says, don't upset them. Stay with us, because these aren't new lessons. They're daily lessons you've been living and losing to. Here's what you'll get in each part. The dirty little phrase manipulators use, why it stings so deeply. A real elder's story who lived it. And a Buddhist-inspired way to respond that doesn't require exile or yelling. Don't miss part 6, the manipulator in your mirror. That one alone could save you a decade of regret and maybe your next relationship. If this hits home, like and subscribe. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep creating clarity and calm for our elders. Because your freedom shouldn't have an expiration date. Let's begin. Part 1, the polite prison, how you were trained to be controlled. Let's talk about the most dangerous kind of manipulation. The kind that comes wrapped in politeness. You know the type. You didn't want to say yes, but you smiled and nodded like your head was rented out to other people's expectations. You've nodded so much in life, I'm surprised your neck hasn't filed a formal complaint. But this didn't start yesterday. Oh no, it began when you were young, probably before you even had a full set of teeth. Be good, they said. And what they meant was, don't cry too loud, don't question too much. Be agreeable, be convenient. You were trained to be loved, not to be free. You got treats when you pleased. You got punished, or worse, ignored when you didn't. That's not parenting. That's dog training with dinner plates. Somewhere between learning to say please and thank you, many of us picked up an invisible leash, and we've been dragging it behind us ever since, calling it manners. But let me tell you something. True spiritual growth begins where your performance ends. Buddhism doesn't hand you a script, it hands you silence, a mirror, and sometimes a broom to clean out all the stories you've been acting out for decades without realizing the audience left a long time ago. Now, if you're over 60, you might think, well, it's too late now. I've always been like this. I'm just a nice person. But here's the Ram Dass-style gut punch. Being nice isn't a personality. It's often a survival strategy. Niceness is what we do when we're afraid to be real. And real is what manipulators hate most. Let me tell you a story. There was a 72-year-old woman named Ruth who volunteered at her local church every Sunday. Rain, shine, flu, hip pain. Ruth was there. People loved her. She's so helpful, they said. Always the first to arrive and last to leave. What they didn't know? Ruth hated it. She didn't believe in half the sermons, didn't like the coffee, and once confessed to a friend that she fantasized about accidentally setting off the fire alarm during service just to get sent home. So why did she stay? Because she didn't know how to say no. Because somewhere in her wiring, I don't want to translated into I'm selfish. Because no one had ever told her that joy, not obligation, is the sign you're on the right path. And so she stayed until her body rebelled and her knees finally did what her mouth never could. They refused to kneel. That was the beginning of Ruth's spiritual awakening. It started with ibuprofen and ended with a boundary. She told the pastor, politely and with great joy, I'm done. And for the first time in years, she stayed in bed on a Sunday and didn't feel guilty. She felt free. That's the kind of liberation we're talking about here. Because manipulation isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet agreement you didn't realize you made. An inner rulebook written by people you no longer even speak to. And the first step to freedom? Recognizing that you've been playing nice instead of being real. Now, ready to tear up that script? Stay with me. In the next part, we'll dive into the 3 manipulative tools used by nearly everyone who's ever made you feel guilty, praised, or terrified into doing what they wanted, all while smiling. Spoiler, it's not just them. Sometimes it's you. Part 2. The 3 weapons of every manipulator. Praise, pity, panic. So let's get real. Manipulators don't usually walk into your life twirling a mustache and tying your self-worth to train tracks. They show up with casseroles, compliments, cracked voices, and just enough charm to make you second-guess your own instincts. And their weapons? Surprisingly polite. Let's break it down. Most manipulators don't need violence. They've got 3 ancient tools so effective that even your grandmother's cat probably used them on you. 1. Praise, the sugar-coated handcuff. Wow, you're such a good listener. You always know how to fix things. You're not like other people. Translation? I've just marked you as someone I can emotionally invoice later. This is the classic move. Butter you up until you're soft enough to spread. Praise is a setup, a kindness laced with expectation. You feel seen, you feel valued, and just like that, you've swallowed the hook. Buddhism teaches that clinging to praise is just as toxic as clinging to anger, because both hijack your clarity. The moment you crave validation, you become hostage to whoever's offering it. As Ram Dass might say, when someone says you're amazing, thank them. Then watch your ego giggle like it just got a cookie. And then, don't act on it. 2. Pity, the cracked wing trick. Ever seen a bird fake an injury to lure predators away from its nest? That's pity-based manipulation. They tell you they're tired, overwhelmed, nobody gets them. And you're the only one who really understands. You've been knighted. Congratulations. You've just become their emotional service animal. Here's the kicker. The pity move doesn't ask. It makes you offer. It's the silent expectation that if you don't help, you're cold, you're cruel. You've abandoned them. A manipulator in this mode is like a leaky faucet. They don't ask for a plumber, but they sure make a lot of noise until you start fixing them. Buddhist psychology would call this attachment through victimhood. You mistake enabling for compassion. But enabling someone's weakness is like feeding a fire because it looks cold. Eventually, it burns you both. 3. Panic, the fire alarm in the soul. This one's theatrical. If you leave me, I'll break. If you don't do this, I'll lose everything. If you don't agree, you're heartless. Now, panic isn't always shouted. It can be whispered. A slight quiver in the voice, a heavy silence after a disagreement, a vague threat wrapped in vulnerability. Manipulators use panic because it works, especially on kind, elderly people who've been taught their entire lives to not make waves. You've kept the peace for decades. And this feels like war. But here's the thing, their chaos doesn't have to become your karma. A Zen teacher once said, the house is on fire, but if it's not your house, don't run in. You can love someone and still leave their drama burning behind a fireproof door labeled not mine. These 3 weapons, praise, pity, and panic, aren't inherently evil. In fact, we've all used them. Yes, even you. Especially when you were tired, scared, or needed something you couldn't just say aloud. So don't just look outward, look inward. You might be wielding the same tools on yourself. But we'll get to that later. Next up, we'll explore how guilt became a family heirloom, passed down like bad china, and why it's time you stopped polishing it. You ready for that? Part 3. The lie of loyalty. How families weaponize guilt. Let's talk about guilt, the family glue stick. Not the healthy kind that reminds you to call your sister once in a while. I'm talking about chronic, hereditary guilt. The kind that's been simmering in the slow cooker since you were in diapers, and somehow everyone still expects you to take a bite. Here's the quiet part, no one says out loud in family photos. Loyalty isn't love, and guilt isn't gratitude. But that's not how most of us were raised, is it? You were probably told that family comes first, that you should always be there, that sacrifice is noble, even when it tastes like ash. And slowly, without realizing it, your backbone became a doormat, with welcome home written in tears. You hear this one all the time, after all I've done for you. Ah yes, the classic guilt line. It's less a statement and more of a receipt. You're being billed emotionally for a transaction you never agreed to. It doesn't matter if the gift was given with love. If it comes with an invisible price tag, it was never a gift. It was a loan with emotional interest. Ram Dass would have said, unconditional love doesn't come with a loyalty program. You're not a frequent flyer in someone else's codependent airline. Get off the plane. Take your own damn trip. Let me tell you about Hal. Hal is 79. He's a quiet, decent man with a magnificent mustache and a son named Jeremy who moved into his basement just for a few months. Back in 1998, Jeremy hasn't paid rent, ever. He's got Wi-Fi, a fridge full of Hal's groceries, and a personality that blends the worst parts of a barista and a cult leader. Anytime Hal hints at boundaries, like maybe it's time to contribute, Jeremy whips out the emotional defibrillator. I'm still healing from my childhood. You just don't understand me. After all you've done, now you want to kick me out? And Hal? Hal nods, says nothing, goes back upstairs. Because he's scared of losing a son he already lost to entitlement 20 years ago. But here's what Hal forgot, and what many seniors forget. Being a parent doesn't mean being a permanent emotional retirement plan. You can love your child and still set boundaries that don't involve subsidizing their spiritual laziness. In Buddhist psychology, guilt is a form of craving. Craving for reconciliation, identity, and peace. But true peace comes from truth, not from sacrificing your dignity on the altar of someone else's comfort. The next time someone says, "You owe me," try this. Smile, breathe, and say, "I'm grateful for the past, but I'm responsible for my present." If they don't like it, let them. Your truth isn't a group project. Because here's the twist. The people who try to guilt you the most are often the ones who fear your independence the most. You breaking free forces them to face their own unfinished stories. And speaking of stories, do you ever feel like you're acting in someone else's script? That's where we're headed next. Let's pull back the curtain and expose the playwright. Part 4. The Theater of Control. Manipulators as playwrights of your life. Welcome to the show. No, really. Welcome. Because whether you knew it or not, you've been starring in a drama someone else directed, produced, and wrote, and they didn't even ask if you wanted the part. The worst part? You've memorized your lines. Of course I'll help. No problem at all. I'm just happy to be needed. Round of applause. Standing ovation. You've played the pleaser, peacemaker, guilt sponge, and silent sufferer beautifully. But who wrote this script? Chances are you didn't. It started early. A parent who rewarded silence. A teacher who punished resistance. A partner who praised you when you gave in. You learned quickly that playing your part meant avoiding conflict, and that applause, even hollow, felt better than abandonment. This isn't just psychological. It's existential. Manipulators are playwrights. They don't have to tie you up. They just write a version of you that you're too tired to correct. And if you deviate from their script, oh, the drama. Cue the sighs, cue the stares, cue the line, "You've changed." In Buddhism, there's a teaching that liberation starts when you drop the roles. Not change them. Drop them. Stop being the character. Stop playing the good monk, the kind grandma, the endlessly forgiving spouse. Because as long as you're acting, you can't be free. And you can't rewrite the story while you're stuck inside it. Ram Dass once said, "I gave up roles when I realized I was playing 10 at once, and none of them could breathe." That's what happens when you let others dictate who you should be. You suffocate under layers of obligation, persona, and false loyalty. You ever notice that older people, really wise older people, get weirdly unpredictable? They say what they mean. They walk away when bored. They wear socks with sandals and dare you to say something. That's not senility. That's liberation. They've stopped auditioning. They know they're not here to impress. They're here to exist. Honestly, fully, without lines written by others. That's the kind of elder you're becoming. The kind who rewrites the ending. Here's a simple practice. Pick a role you're sick of. Maybe it's the always available friend. Maybe it's the tough guy who never cries. Maybe it's the woman who never complains. Write down the next scene they expect you to play. Then, don't. Say the thing they don't want you to say. Sit in silence when they expect performance. Walk away without offering an explanation. At first, it'll feel like you're betraying something, but you're not. You're just firing the director. Because when you stop playing the role, manipulators panic. They don't know what to do with a cast member who improvises. They lose control. And that's your cue to take the stage, not as a character, but as yourself. Next up, the scene-stealing skill that manipulators fear most, saying no without exploding or apologizing. Ready? Part 5. How to say no without apologizing or exploding. Let's face it, saying no shouldn't feel like launching a missile. But for many of us, especially those who've spent decades being agreeable, It feels like betrayal with punctuation. No, that's it. Just 2 letters. And yet somehow it carries more guilt than forgetting your anniversary and your mother's birthday on the same day while accidentally running over her flower bed. Why is it so hard? Because we were trained, housebroken really, to associate no with cruelty. From the time we were toddlers, no made adults frown, teachers frown, bosses frown, lovers, friends drift. So we turned no into a performance. No, unless you really need me. No, but I can do it next time. No, I'm sorry, it's just that. Insert verbal gymnastics until your throat hurts. Here's a truth you can tattoo on your soul. Saying no is not a lack of compassion. It's an act of clarity. In Buddhist psychology, compassion without wisdom becomes chaos. It becomes codependence. It becomes burnout disguised as generosity. Ram Dass said, "We're all just walking each other home." Yes, but you don't have to carry everyone's luggage, especially the ones who packed rocks and called it emotional need. Want to build your no muscle? Start small. Every day, say no to something tiny, on purpose. Say no to second helpings. Say no to a phone call when you're tired. Say no to the inner voice that says you must reply to that text immediately or you're a bad person. When you start practicing on the small things, you'll be ready when the big ones come. Because they will come. Like when your grown child expects you to babysit for the 3rd weekend in a row. Or when your old friend guilt trips you into joining a committee you left in 1994. You don't need a PowerPoint presentation. You don't need tears. You don't even need an excuse. You just need one full breath and this line, "I won't be doing that." That's it. Delivered with love or deadpan, whatever works. Let me tell you about Shirley. Shirley is 67. For 25 years, she hosted a Sunday roast for her adult children. Not because she loved it, but because they expected it. Every week, she'd roast, glaze, baste, and fake smile through 4 hours of chaos and cleaning while pretending she enjoyed the screaming toddlers and overcooked carrots. Until one day, she woke up, rolled over, and said out loud, "I hate Sundays." So she texted the family group chat. "No roast this week. I'm learning how to paint." Reactions ranged from confused to nuclear, but guess what? She never cooked another one. And now, she paints in her sunroom every Sunday while listening to jazz and occasionally flipping off the group chat in her head. And she has never felt more alive. The point is, you're not obligated to be agreeable forever. No is not a slap. It's a boundary. And manipulators hate it because it forces them to confront a truth. They don't own your time, your energy, or your guilt anymore. Coming up next, we're going to look at the one manipulator who's been in your life the longest. The one in your mirror. Let's go there. Part 6, the manipulator in your mirror. So far, we've pointed fingers. We've talked about the guilt trippers, the flattery farmers, the panic-planting puppet masters. But now, let's talk about someone a little closer. You. Oh, don't look away now. We all do it. You, me, even old monks in sandals that squeak on temple floors. Because buried underneath every yes you didn't mean and every fake smile you practiced in the bathroom mirror is a little manipulator trying really hard to keep things safe. Not evil, not cruel, just afraid. And like most manipulators, your inner saboteur thinks it's helping. Self-gaslighting 101, how you trick you. It's not that bad. I shouldn't complain. Maybe I am overreacting. They didn't mean it like that. Sound familiar? This is self-manipulation in its most toxic form. When you rewrite your own suffering so it fits someone else's comfort. You edit your emotions like a bad novel and then wonder why the plot never makes sense. Ram Dass would have laughed and said, "You're not broken. You're just a very creative liar who forgot she's writing the story." And Buddhism? Buddhism would nod and pour you tea. Because Buddhist psychology has long known what modern therapy only recently confirmed. The mind left untrained becomes its own captor. Here's something I hear often from folks over 60. "I've always been like this." And I always respond with, "Great, then you're overdue for an update." Because staying the same just because you've been that way a long time is like keeping a VHS player because you love Titanic. You can still love the story, but maybe it's time to watch it in HD. Want to meet the part of you that plays small, that avoids conflict, that swallows rage and sells it back to yourself as understanding? Sit in silence. Let your thoughts bubble up. Watch which ones sound like your voice but feel like your mother's, or your ex's, or that first-grade teacher who said you talk too much. Then ask one question: is this me, or a mask I forgot to take off? And be prepared. Some of those masks have been on so long, they think they're skin. But here's the good news. Once you see it, you don't unsee it. And once you stop manipulating yourself, other manipulators lose their grip too. Meet Gene, 82. Tough guy. Fought in a war, never cried in public, wore button-up shirts to take out the trash. Gene had a brother. The brother lied, stole from him, and ghosted him for 30 years. And Gene kept saying, "It's fine, I'm over it, I've moved on." Until one day at breakfast, Gene dropped his toast mid-butter and muttered, "I want an apology." He said it out loud for the first time. Then he cried, quietly, like his soul had finally gotten out of a tight suit it had been wearing for decades. And that was it. No apology ever came. But Gene apologized to himself for pretending he didn't care. That's the kind of power you get when you stop playing mind games with yourself. So what's the takeaway here? Sometimes the strongest manipulator in your life isn't your boss or your partner or your needy nephew. Sometimes it's the version of you who thinks suffering quietly makes you holy. Coming up next, let's learn how to become emotionally untouchable without turning into a cold block of ice. It's called emotional Teflon, and manipulators hate it. You ready? Part 7, Emotional Teflon, How to Be Untouchable Without Being a Jerk. Let's be honest. Some of you hear the word detachment and think it means turning into an emotionally constipated monk who never texts back. Others think boundaries sound like you're about to install a barbed wire fence around your soul. But here's the truth. You can be deeply loving and still refuse to be manipulated. In fact, it's the most loving thing you can do. Because when you stop being everyone's emotional garbage can, they actually have to learn how to take out their own trash. Emotional Teflon. What is it? Imagine someone throws a guilt ball at you. In the old days, you'd catch it, cradle it, feel bad for it, maybe knit it a sweater and sleep next to it for a few years. Not anymore. Now, that guilt ball just slides off like grease on a well-seasoned skillet. That's emotional Teflon. You're not hard. You're not cold. You're aware. And awareness, my friend, is what manipulators fear most. Because manipulators thrive on emotional urgency. They want you reactive. They want you flustered. They want you deciding things with your heart racing and your mouth dry. So when you don't react, when you just pause, they lose their rhythm. And once their rhythm is gone, their power dissolves. In Buddhism, the moment between the stimulus and your response is where your freedom lives. It's the space where the magic happens. Someone says something manipulative, you breathe. Someone tries to use pity or panic to corner you, you don't flinch, you don't explain, you watch. As Thich Nhat Hanh said, feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky. Conscious breathing is my anchor. So let them huff, let them puff. You're the brick house. Let me tell you about Eileen. Eileen is 76, recently retired, and notorious for being too nice. That was until her sister cornered her at a family barbecue with the classic, "If you don't lend me $2,000, I'm going to be evicted. But I know you won't say no. You never do." Now, old Eileen would have started crying, reached for her checkbook and eaten 3 cupcakes out of emotional stress. But new Eileen? She paused, took a slow sip of lemonade, and simply said, "I'm sorry you're in a tough spot. I can't do that." No justification, no backpedaling, just clarity wrapped in kindness. Her sister? She exploded. Eileen didn't. That night, Eileen slept like a monk. Here's a challenge. The next time someone tries to pressure you emotionally, don't respond for 10 seconds. Just pause. Let their energy hit silence. Let your breath be your answer. You'll see very quickly whether they were asking or controlling. Because manipulators hate empty space. They fill it with guilt, with threats, with charm. But when you meet them with stillness, they don't know what to do. Remember, silence can be a sentence. And peace is the kind of power that doesn't raise its voice. Next up, we're diving into one of the most unexpected forms of manipulation, generosity. Yes, you heard me. Giving can be a trap. Let's talk about it. Part 8. The generosity trap. When giving becomes a collar. There's a kind of giving that smells like love, but feels like debt. It looks like warmth, charity, selflessness. But look closer, and you'll see something else. A leash. A lot of manipulation doesn't come through cruelty. It comes wrapped in gifts, favors, inheritances, and "I'm just trying to help." Let me be very clear. Not all giving is generous. Sometimes giving is just an elegant way to say, now you owe me. You've probably heard it before. After everything I've done for you, I gave you everything. Don't you dare walk away after all I gave. That's not love. That's a transaction you didn't agree to. It's like getting a box of chocolates, eating them, and then someone shows up with an invoice and says, by the way, I also own your future Thursdays. Ram Dass once joked, we're all just giving each other presents until someone starts demanding you wear the wrapping paper forever. In Buddhism, the highest form of generosity is dana, offering without attachment, expectation, or control. When you give with purity, the gift frees both giver and receiver. When you give with control, it's not a gift, it's a collar. And here's where this gets really juicy for older adults. You've spent decades giving, time, money, effort, energy. And now as you get older, that part of your identity might feel sacred. Like I was always the helper, the provider, the rescuer. But if you're honest, maybe you've also used that identity to keep people close, to feel important, to maintain control without confrontation. It happens. No shame. But it's time to wake up. Meet Ron. 80 years old, widower, father of 3. Ron loved his family, but they rarely visited. They forgot birthdays, skipped holidays, called him grumpy behind his back. But oh, they knew one thing, Ron's will. He'd remind them subtly and often, well, I guess I'll just leave the house to whoever cares about me. That wasn't generosity, that was emotional ransom. Until one day Ron sat on his porch, stared at the sun and whispered, I don't want to buy love anymore. He rewrote his will, gave half to a Buddhist hospice and the rest to his cat. The kids? Furious. Ron? Enlightened. He stopped giving to be remembered and started giving to be free. Try this. The next time you feel the urge to give, pause. Ask yourself, am I giving freely or investing in emotional control? Would I still give if this person never thanked me? Does this act bring peace or power? If your generosity feels like fishing for loyalty, cut the line. Because true freedom isn't just about not being manipulated, it's about not needing to manipulate others through kindness either. Coming up next, we're diving even deeper into silence. Not as absence, but as weapon. Yes, there's a silence that screams louder than words. And if you've ever been on the receiving end of it, you know what I mean. Part 9, the silence that screams, how to read what's not said. Sometimes manipulation doesn't come in raised voices. It comes in silence, not peaceful monk in the forest silence. We're talking loaded, passive-aggressive, air thick as oatmeal silence. The kind where nothing is said but everything is meant. The sigh, the long pause, the look. The nothing's wrong that makes you feel like you just ran over their dog with your soul. Welcome to Emotional Morse Code, where words are optional but guilt is guaranteed. This is one of the most sophisticated manipulation tactics because there's plausible deniability. I didn't say anything. It triggers your imagination, which fills in the worst-case scenario. It preys on your empathy. What did I do wrong? How can I fix this? In psychology, it's called emotional withdrawal. In Buddhism, it's just more illusion. Because silence, when used this way, isn't absence, it's presence with a knife behind its back. A Zen teacher once said, words lie, but tension doesn't. Manipulators know this. That's why they don't need to argue. They just withdraw, freeze you out, make you guess. It's like living in a haunted house where the ghost won't just say what it wants, it just bangs pots around until you're apologizing for being alive. But here's the twist. The silence isn't about you, it's about control. Because as long as you're chasing their approval, reading their mood, dancing around the minefield, they're winning. Meet Beatrice, 84, sharp as a tack. Her daughter Wendy visits once a week and always leaves in a huff. Why? Because Beatrice started saying what she wanted. No, I don't want to go to the church potluck. No, I don't need help with my laundry. Yes, I ate the last cookie. I regret nothing. Wendy would respond not with words, but with a tight jaw, a dramatic purse zipping, and the classic exit sigh that echoed like a funeral march. Old Beatrice, she used to chase that sigh down the hall. Are you okay? Did I upset you? Talk to me. New Beatrice, she pours another cup of tea and hums Sinatra, because she finally got it. If someone can't say what's wrong, they don't get to make me feel bad for it. Here's how to tell when silence is peaceful versus manipulative. Ask yourself, does this silence feel calm or charged? Do I feel grounded or anxious? Is it inviting or intimidating? And then act accordingly. If it's charged, don't fill the gap. Don't rush to fix. Don't beg for clarity. Let the silence sit, awkward, clunky, real. If they want to talk like an adult, they will. And if they don't, well, that's their discomfort to babysit, not yours, because not every silence is sacred. Some are traps, and the moment you stop fearing them, you become uncatchable. Coming up next, let's talk about the most stubborn string of all, the one tied to your need to be liked. Because that may be the last form of manipulation you haven't let go of. Part 10, your last manipulation, the belief you must be liked. This one hurts, because unlike the manipulators we can point at and name, your boss, your cousin Chad, your ex with the emotional range of a teaspoon, this one lives inside your need to be liked. It's the final boss, the puppet string you tie around your own neck and smile through. What will they think of me? I hope they're not upset. I just want to keep the peace. Sound familiar? Of course it does. You've been taught since childhood that likability equals safety. From preschool, be nice so others want to play with you. To the office, don't speak up, you'll ruffle feathers. To aging, don't make demands, be easy, be grateful. So you smiled when you were ignored, laughed when the joke wasn't funny, nodded when your soul screamed, and every time you abandoned yourself to stay likable, someone else's power grew stronger. In Buddhism, clinging to praise is just another form of suffering. Why? Because if your joy rises and falls with someone else's approval, you are not free, you are leased. Ram Dass, in classic Ram Dass fashion, put it this way: when you stop needing to be liked, your soul throws a party in your liver, and everyone's invited, except your ego. You don't need to be mean, you just need to stop shape-shifting to be digestible. Some people aren't meant to like you, and that's not a threat, it's liberation. Margaret is 73, witty, wears bold lipstick, loves jazz, and says whatever she's thinking. One day, she finally tells her weekly bridge group she's bored of playing. I'd rather go hiking, or read weird fiction, or sit in my garden and talk to the squirrels. They don't like it. Next week, no invite. Old Margaret would have cried. New Margaret? She sends the group a fruit basket with a card that says, "Thanks for freeing up my Wednesday." That's the energy. Because when you stop needing to be liked, you become magnetic in a different way. Not by forcing connection, but by standing in your truth. And yes, some people will fall away. Let them. It's better to be disliked for being real than loved for being furniture. Here's a strange little practice that works wonders. Once a week, sit down, close your eyes, and imagine someone disapproving of you. Not violently, just quietly disappointed. And instead of fixing it, breathe. Let the discomfort rise, then watch it fall. You'll notice something. The world doesn't end. And eventually, the fear of not being liked becomes just another cloud passing through the sky. Because the truth is, you don't owe the world your agreeableness. What you owe it, what you owe yourself, is honesty, clarity, and the kind of love that doesn't need applause. Coming up next, let's bring this full circle. The puppet, he's walking off stage. The script, you're setting it on fire. Let's end this where it began, with freedom. And just like that, the puppet unhooks the last string, stretches its wooden joints, and realizes, wait a second. I was never meant to dance for anyone but myself. We've unmasked praise, pity, silence, guilt, and even the version of you who quietly manipulates yourself into being likable. We called out the casserole-coated guilt trips. We watched Beatrice sip tea while her family's drama exploded like fireworks in the driveway. And we reminded you that silence, when weaponized, isn't peace. It's just passive aggression in a fancy robe. What now? Breathe, laugh, say no, without a 5-paragraph essay. And next time you feel someone trying to twist your soul into a thank you note for abuse, smile kindly and walk away slowly, like a monk leaving a house that smells just a little too much like obligation. If something in this video made your heart unclench, even a little, help us keep going. Click like, subscribe, and share this with a friend who needs to escape their own emotional puppet show. Let's reach 1,000 subscribers and build a little sangha for the silver-haired and spiritually curious. Drop a comment below. When did you realize someone was pulling your strings? We'd love to hear your story, because the moment you tell it, the strings loosen. Until next time, from Buddhist wisdom for the elderly, keep your tea hot, your boundaries clear, and your inner monk well rested.